I have a React app that generates code using GPT based on prompts. So I could type in something like a profile page and it will generate all the code I need for that component. And I set up all of this OpenAI code in a separate video, which you can check out if you want to. But in this video, I'm going to focus on setting up a database so that I can actually persist this chat data. And for the database, I'm going to use Turso, which is the fastest, easiest, cheapest database in the world. It is a SQLite database that you can run at the edge, and it works really well. I have a couple of apps in production using this. And my opinion is that you should always start with a relational database and only switch to NoSQL when you have a really good reason to. So we'll be using Turso for the database, and for the ORM, of course, we're going to be using Drizzle. So we're going to start by actually setting this up using Drizzle. And since this is Turso, we'll be following all of the SQLite steps. Actually, they have a Turso step right here. So I am going to start by installing these things. Let's use bun, and I'll just paste that into terminal. And then we can copy this boilerplate code. And in my next app, I like to create a new database folder inside of source, not inside of app. I'm going to call this database. And inside of this, I'm going to put an index.ts file so that if I import database, I just get everything out of this file. I don't need to run a query right now. What I do want to do is export DB. So we're going to use Drizzle to create a client and then export this DB thing, which we can use to run all the insert and select statements that we're going to need for this app. And then this does depend on a database URL and a database auth token. So this is going to come from our environment variables and auth. The next step is we need to actually set up the schema for the tables. I am going to go to column types and SQLite, and here are all the examples you really need to set up your schema. Before I do that, I'm actually going to create a schema directory. This is where we're going to put all the tables. And I know I'm going to need a chat and a messages table. Actually, I'm going to keep these both plural because I like to pluralize my tables. So my chats table, I'm just going to use comments for now, is going to have an ID, name, and maybe like a created timestamp. Messages are going to have an ID, a chat ID, the content of the actual message created at timestamp again. So this is starting to look like a standard chat app. Every single time I start a new chat, I just create one of these, and then all the messages are related to chats with a foreign key. So each chat can have many messages. Every message belongs to one chat. But since this is a chat GPT message, we're also going to need the role, which can be a user, system, or assistant. And since chats is the simpler table, let's set that up first. So I kind of just want to start with an example. I guess I'll go with this. That's fine. And usually I'd probably want an auto-incrementing integer to be the ID for a table. But in this case, where I have a chat, so if I come over here, I'm creating a chat and I want to list all the chats here. If I select a chat, I want the ID of the chat to appear in the URL, and I potentially want those to be shareable. So I'm going to set this to be text, and then I'm going to create some sort of unguessable unique ID just for my chats table. And then I'll rename this to chats and this to chats. This is my JavaScript variable, and this is the name of the table in the database. This is the property in JavaScript. This is the property name in the database. So anything in the strings you see here will be what the database sees. And then I'll just keep going here. So name is going to be text, and then created at. I'm actually going to make this text too, created at, but I need some helpers here. So let's go back to Drizzle. I want current timestamp. Okay, so I can just copy these. So we're going to have text timestamp, default, current timestamp. And then I need SQL, which I can import from Drizzle ORM. And I'm not really using integer here. And then for all three of these, I want to make sure they're not null. This top one here is going to be the primary key. And then I think chats is looking pretty good. I just need to make sure I export this so I can see it from the other parts of my application. So this is the schema for my chats table. Now I'm going to copy this for my messages schema. ID here, I'm actually going to use the integer because I'm not going to need to share a message. Going to rename chats to messages here. For some reason, it imported the Postgres version of this. That's weird. No, I just need integer from SQLite. This I'm going to replace with content. Then I have two more. Let's see, I have chat ID, which is going to be the foreign key. So that's good right now, but I do need to have it reference the other table. And then we'll have role, which is also going to be text, but I want to make sure that it's limited to only one of these. So let's go check for that. Let's check for enum. So right here is how I can add an enum value in SQLite. That looks good. So role is gonna have that enum, too many brackets. This is gonna be either user or assistant, since I'm not gonna store system messages in the database. And then since this is a foreign key, I need to make sure that it's referencing the other table. Let's do a search, foreign keys. So we can say references the other table ID. So if this were user ID, I would look like this, but it's not, it's for the chat table. So let's import chats from, there we go, perfect. So this column references the primary key of the other table. So I have my schema set up here in my application. I just need to create a database that I can apply this to, and then I can start inserting and selecting data. So I'm gonna go back to Turso and we're gonna check out the docs here to see how we can get set up. So maybe let's go to tutorials and we'll do the CLI walkthrough. So I have already installed Turso on my laptop. So we'll go to step 2. I've already signed up for Turso. So I'm going to go to step 3 and I'm just going to run Turso db create and create a new database for this project. Test app demo. Turns out I'm not logged in. So let's quickly log in. And now let's try creating the database. So it set me up a new database. Now let's follow along with the steps. Let's show the database. It probably picked my closest location to put this in. I should name my database correctly. Test app demo. So I have a new database. That's the URL, that's the ID, and the location is Boston and Seattle. All right, I've set up my account to have 2 locations with replicas. Okay, that doesn't matter. It just set up a database and they're accessible over the internet. All right, so let's go to the next one, make queries. I don't care about that. I don't care about replicating. I need the one with the keys. So how do I generate keys? Vercel setup guide? Let's see. No. Where do I set up the keys? Keys? Here we go. Okay. Turso db tokens create e none. Let's paste that in. This should be my database name, whatever I named it. Test app demo. Here is the key to the database. Here's the database ID, and e none means that this won't expire, so I can use this as long as I like. These are the details that I would put into Vercel. I can put them in locally too. So I'm going to copy this key here and open up my environment variables, and I'll just paste that in, and that is the auth token. So set that equal there, and then we need the database URL. So this is the URL for this specific database. I'm going to make sure I copy this correctly, database URL. So this is the information I need to access the database over the public internet. Like I said, this is what I'll put on Vercel or whatever server I'm using. But if I'm just doing local development, I can use this database, but there's a really nice feature of Turso, because it's a SQL-like database, where I can just set up a local database really, really easily and access it over localhost 8080. So let's do this right now. And then later on, I could use these details. So to do this and get this working, using the Turso CLI, I can run Turso dev db file dev.db. This last part doesn't really matter. It's just whatever name I want to give to the local file for the database. So it now sets up a local file. It's hosting that at localhost 8080. I should be able to see, yeah, there's my database files. Make sure you don't commit those. But I can now really quickly get set up with my database using this local version. So now I'm going to go back to the Drizzle docs and go to Drizzle kit, because this is the thing we're going to use to actually apply the schema. So I need to install this into my app. And then, where's the quick start? There we go. That's what I need. So over here in the top level of the project, I'm going to need a drizzle.config.ts file. I'm going to paste that in. So my schema is in source/db/schema. And then we need to add driver is going to be Turso. We need db credentials. Perfect. All right. So this is the object we need. A URL is going to be process.env.database URL. Perfect. And the auth token is going to be awesome, the auth token. Okay, so this is going to pull in the environment variables. It's going to be able to use all of the schema files, all the files in the schema directory, perfect, and apply a database push or migration to the database. And if you're not using bun, you'll need to bring in the environment variables somehow, maybe using .env. But since I'm using bun here, I should be able to run bun x drizzle kit push SQLite, and this should push my schema changes to the database. It did not for some reason. It might be I'm using localhost instead of 127.0.0.1. That is a solution to a lot of problems. Okay, let's try that again. Nope, still failing. I'm a moron. I put S in there. All right, fine. Yeah, obviously an SSL issue. Okay, cool. All right, so it pushed those updates to my local SQLite database. Perfect. Okay, so now I should actually be able to interact with the database. So I'm going to close all of these windows and we're going to talk about the workflow of this application a bit. A user can input a message here and hit send, and this should create a new message, trigger the OpenAI GPT response, but it should also save that message to the chat that it's a part of. So if it's already part of an existing chat, just use that as a foreign key. But if no chat already exists, then I need to create a new chat as well. So essentially, before sending a message or creating a message, I do need a chat entity to exist in the database. So in here, I have this handle submit, and it does a whole bunch of things, but right here, it is sending off a request to the backend to start streaming in that LLM response. So before I get here, I really want to make sure I have a chat ID that I can use, that I can link to my message entities. So the way I'm going to go about doing this is I'll keep this in state. So I'm going to create a new state variable called chat ID, set chat ID, and let's just make that a string so it can default as an empty string. So if I open up this page, if I like refresh, then I'm not part of a chat, which means this is an empty string. So then when I handle submit, the first time I hit enter, I'm going to check to see if a chat ID already exists, and if it doesn't, then we'll have to create a new entity in the database, create a new chat in the database, and get the ID and store it in state. And I'll delete these comments from the last video. So right here, if there is no chat ID, I need to create a new one. And the easiest way to do that in a Next.js application would be to create a server action. So I'm going to create just an actions.ts file here, and we're going to export an async function that is going to create a chat. And this needs to be use server. So in here, I'm going to import db from my @/db. So this will just import the index file, which imports my db object here. And this is how I interact with the database using Drizzle. So then in here to create a new chat, I can just say db.insert. Then I need the chat table. So let's import chats from schema/chats. So we're going to insert into chats values, and then which values are required here. So we need an ID, a name, and then the created has a default value. So we're going to need ID and name. And I'm not really sure what to do about name now, so I might leave that blank. An ID needs to be a unique ID that I can share in the URL and can't be guessed. So I'm going to use the same technique I used in my S3 video. And in my utils file, I have this function that is generate random string that uses the Node crypto library or the Edge runtime crypto library to create an unguessable unique string. So we'll go back into actions, and I'm just going to import this. Generate random string from const ID equals generate random string. We'll make that 16 bytes, and I'll throw that in here. And I'm just going to use the ID for the name now. I could update this later, but this is good enough. So this will create a new chat. So result is going to await insertion. If I want to get this, and actually I don't need to get the result, I can just await for that to be done. And then out of this, I'm going to return an object that has the ID in it because the client is going to need the ID. So essentially, if I call this function, we'll create a brand new chat, we'll return the ID to the client component that can then store it in state. And I would most likely also want to do some like user auth or something if I had that set up just to make sure the user was logged in and attach this to that user profile. But this is going to work just fine for now. Back over in my chat content, I would usually import the action straight into here, but I've been having issues with that. So instead, I'm going to import create chat function from actions, and I'm going to pass that from this server component, the page component, into this child component, which is just called chat content. So we'll say create chat equals create chat. So then in my chat content child component that does all of the form actions and everything in the client, I need to accept that. So we're going to create a new thing here. Create chat is going to be a method that doesn't take any values, but instead returns a string. Object that has ID, which is a string. There we go. Okay, so that's the type create chat returns. So then down here, if I'm not already creating messages within a chat, we're going to create a brand new chat. So const chat equals await create chat, and then we'll store that ID in state. Perfect, just like that. But since setting state is asynchronous, I should probably store this in a variable. So I'll just call current chat ID equals chat ID. If there is no chat ID, then we're going to grab that. We're going to create a new one and then set it to update the state. But now we have a reference to it in this variable that we can use down here. So when I am sending a request to the server to basically send these messages and stream down the LLM data, I'm going to also attach into that chat ID. So chat ID is current chat ID. Do that for both versions that I send up to the server. So then in my route over here, let's see, API message route, I am getting content, but I should also now have a chat ID. So I should probably do a check. If there is no chat ID, then return new response D is required. Perfect. And again, I'd probably have some user auth stuff. Check if the user is logged in. Make sure that chat belongs to them. When I get around to adding user auth, I would add these things, but this is good. So make sure I have a chat ID. And then I also want to go to the database and make sure that chat ID actually exists in the database. So I'll do a similar thing here. I'll import the database from DB, import chats from, there we go. So now I'll do a quick db.select, select star from chats, where this is not the right syntax. I need where eq chats.id is chat ID. And this eq comes from Drizzle directly. So import eq, which is equals, from Drizzle ORM. Oh, that's it. Cool. And then since this is SQLite, I also need to say get at the end, and I'll say const chat equals await, and then probably do another check, just make sure that the chat actually exists, is not found. So at this point, the chat would definitely exist, and I have the message content that the user submitted in the form there, but I don't yet have the response from the LLM, from GPT. So I want to wait until that response has come back before I add those to the database. So using the OpenAI stream from the AI library, let's actually just look at the docs here. OpenAI stream AI for cell. Let's go in here. Hopefully this is the docs. You know what? I'm actually going to do a search for database, save to database after completion, OpenAI, perfect. Okay, this is exactly what I want. So I'm gonna copy all of that because this OpenAI stream function here accepts the response from OpenAI, but also gives a whole bunch of callback functions. So I don't actually want to do it this way. I am gonna wait for completion from OpenAI and then save all of that in the database. Okay, so right here, the content is what the user has sent. The completion is what GPT has sent, and I need to store these two as separate messages into the database. So let's go db.insert messages, and I'm going to need to import messages up here, import messages from messages, and then the value. So what goes into a message? I need chat ID. Actually, I'm going to change this. I want this to be camel case. Chat ID, role, content. These are the 2 or the 3 required things that I need to add in. So chat ID is going to be the chat ID. We already got that. Role for the first one is going to be user. Content is going to be the actual content. All right, that was easy for the user. Then we'll make this an array so we can pass in multiple objects. And the second object is going to be similar, but this is going to be assistant. And let's see, format for me. Too many brackets, not enough brackets. Don't need that. Oh, I do need that one. What? There we go. Okay, cool. So we're going to insert those 2 things in the database and link them to the chat they're a part of. Let's await that. And we're not really going to do anything else. I guess we should really have some error handling of some sort. Like at the very least, it would probably be nice to console error this so we can see it in the logs. So we're streaming the response down. We're not really going to see any of this in the response we get in the client because that's just for the LLM data. But once that's completed, before we completely disconnect from this endpoint, we're going to store those things into the database. Let's just go through it before we run it, make sure it's not insane. So when we handle submit, if there's no chat ID, create a new chat, then use that ID that comes back from the server action to send these messages back to the server, create an LLM response, and store those in the database. So that means that if I submit again after, that chat ID should be stored in state. So we won't create multiple chats, we'll just create multiple messages for the same chat, in this case, until I refresh the page. So now I'm going to go back to the application. Hopefully it's working. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to bunx drizzle Kit Studio, which will hopefully open up Drizzle Studio. Perfect. Okay, so I have chats and I have messages, and there are 0 entities in each of those tables. So go back over here. I'm going to say write a function in TypeScript. So hopefully this just creates a new chat and then created 2 messages within that chat. My message to instruct it to create the function and the response from GPT creating the function. So if I refresh here, I can see there's 1 chat and 2 messages. The single chat just has that unique ID. And the messages should have my instruction, write a function in TS, and then this TypeScript function. Perfect. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's say write a function in Rust. Okay, wrote a new function. So what I should see here is 4 messages, all with the same ID. And over here, still only 1 chat, even though there's 4 messages. Perfect. Okay, so if I go back here and refresh, it will lose that state. So now if I say write a function in Swift, then this should create a brand new chat, 2 new messages. Okay, just double check that. 2 chats, 6 messages. Perfect. Okay, so they're all being stored in the database. That's really good. So now it would make sense to actually retrieve each chat, put it in this bar over here, and if I click on that, I would hopefully be able to see the last message from that chat. So I'm going to go back over here into my code, and I'm going to go to the initial page, which loads in that client component for the chat content with the form, but also have this chat list with a placeholder here, which is just this stuff over here. And this is a server component so that I can bring in the stuff from the database and just load it into the sidebar here. So I'm going to import db from db, and I just need a list of the chats. So import chats from schema/chats. And then, yeah, when this loads, I'm going to say const chat equals await db select. I guess we could just select the ID in this case. I have a naming collision here. I actually like naming my collections simply. So instead of chats, I'm going to alias this as chats table. That's just a personal preference. So I'm selecting from the chats table. Chats is what I get back from the database. Chats table is the table that exists there. So we're going to select just the chats table ID from chats table, and we're going to get all of them. So then I should be able to loop over these. So chats.map chat, and I'm going to use a link for this to easily be able to link to the chat page from next link. Perfect. So we'll put that in here. Key is chat ID. I'm actually going to change in a moment. I want to make sure that I put class name truncate here so it doesn't grow wildly long. If I had chat name. Actually, I would want to use the chat name, wouldn't I, right here? I don't have any good names. I'm just using the ID as the name, but at some point, maybe I'll change that, and then I'd want it to display the nice name. So I guess I should actually import the name from chats table too. Okay, so we get the ID and the name. It is nice using a type safe ORM like Drizzle, because I would have just put that in and not caught the fact that I completely missed that if it wasn't checking my types. Like, it knows that this is going to be an array of objects that contain ID and name only. That is a super nice feature. I like that there is type safety at the layer that is closest to my database. For this href part, I'm not going to navigate to a new page because that makes refreshing a little bit more difficult. Instead, what I'm going to do is make this a search param. So we're just going to say chat equals and have that chat ID there. But right now, if I go back to the page, yeah, I can see there are those chat IDs. And if I were to click on one, it should give me chat equals the ID up there. So that's really awesome. This is working. Okay. I'm going to go back into my app and go to page. And since this is kind of a long running task, this chat list stuff, it could take a while to connect to the database. I am going to create a skeleton version of this. So export function chat list skeleton. And I'll return, actually, let's use the app for this. Create a skeleton version of this for loading using Tailwind. Let's see if it can do that. Okay, it's a decent amount of code, but let's try it out. I'm down. So we'll return that skeleton version. Then back in my page component, I'm grabbing the chat list. I'm also going to grab the chat list skeleton, and we're going to use suspense here. So we'll suspend. Fallback is the skeleton. Wrap that up. Okay. And then just to test this out, let's make this take a while. So await, new, promise resolve. Should make this take 10 seconds. Okay. So let's refresh this page. I mean, it's not exactly right, but whatever, it's good enough. Okay, so I'm going to take out this fake wait, go back to page, and you can see here that I'm already expecting the chat params. I actually called it chat ID here. Instead, I'm going to change that to chat. So if a chat is passed in here, chat equals whatever the ID is, I'm going to be able to get it in the page component. So if there is a chat ID, I want to load that chat immediately and pass it into my child component where it can display that. Since this child is a client component, I will need to wrap this up so that I can do the database call in the server wrapper that I'm going to create here. So I've got chat content. I'm going to create a new one called, I guess, chat content wrapper. The only reason this exists is so that I can suspend on this. So in here, we're going to take out this and the import. So in the wrapper, we're going to import that, export default async function, chat content wrapper, return. I guess I'll need to grab the create chat from here. And this is going to accept the chat ID as a string. Perfect. And then it will do the loading. Back in this component, if there is a chat ID, so I'll say if there's a chat ID, then we are going to load. Okay, yes, we will suspend. Suspense, fallback. Sure, I'm going to change that fallback in a moment. We'll put in the chat content wrapper and pass in the chat ID. Perfect. Okay. Close suspense. Cool. If there's no chat ID, then we're just going as normal. So if there's nothing to load from the database, just load that page immediately. But if we are loading those chats from the database, we're going to wrap this in suspense and we're going to grab all the chats that exist. So in the wrapper here, I need all that database stuff. So import db from db, import chats, import. And actually, I've just realized I don't need the chats because all I want to do here is if a chat exists, I just want to get the most recent message that was sent from GPT and just display that block of code here, since this app is only really meant to display code blocks returned from GPT. So this is going to be a simple query where I can say const message equals awaitdb.select star from messages table where EQ. I need that again from Drizzle ORM, where the messages table.chat ID is the passed in chat ID. We are gonna order by created at descending so that we can get the most recent one. And this is going to be using the desc function. And I also want the and function here because I don't just want it for this chat. I also want to make sure that the messages table.role is the assistant, because that's the important message that I'm going to want to display. And one more bracket. And then since this is SQLite, we use .get. And now I need to pass this message to my client component. And the client component is using this assistant response to display everything that GPT returns as this code block and in this markdown component. So really what I need to do is be able to pass in the text so that it can be loaded the first time this page loads. So I think what I'm going to do here is say initial assistant response, and that can be an optional string that I will default to an empty string, and then I'll put that in here. There we go. So if there is an initial assistant response from the server, then that will just get loaded in and everything else should work as normal. So if I go back here and I load a chat, it's not doing anything. Let's see if there's anything in the server. Nothing. Oh, I wrote this as params, but this should be search params. So now, oh no, I messed up everything. This is params, not search params, because I actually set this up to work with the slash. So I'm a bit of an idiot there. Let's go back to the chat list. This should have always been a slash, because everything after the slash will be the chat ID, and then back in page, this is chat ID, and the same here. Okay, so I had it set up correctly the first time. Okay, so now if I click on one of these, it will go slash, there we go. All right, so this is now at least going to the correct page, but it's not loading the content. So that's a little weird. Let's just make sure this is coming in, chat ID. So if we go, let's refresh, go to the server. Yeah, there's the chat ID. So if there is a chat ID, perfect, it goes here, it passes in the chat ID. I didn't pass in any message here. Okay, so this is going to be initial assistant response is the message dot content. Okay, that's the thing that comes back from GPT. Okay, so I think hopefully, all right, sick. Okay, so we're loading this one. Perfect. It loads the most recent message. If I click on this one, loads the most recent. Okay, this is working exactly. Perfect. Okay, that is awesome. And then if there isn't a chat response, so if I delete that and hit enter, write a function. Okay, so it does that, gives me a function, and what it should do, it created a new chat here. So what I really want is to see the new chat show up on the side here. If I refresh the page, I can see that appear over here, but I want it to be immediate. I want to be able to see that. So what I'm going to do in my chat list where I'm getting all those chats, I'm going to use unsafe cache as cache. Let's see, am I going to get this right? From Next/cache. It's not unsafe, it's unstable. Unstable cache as cache. And we can take a look at the Next docs to see how this works. So we can bring in unstable cache, allows us to cache the result of expensive operations like database queries. The really cool thing about this function though is that we can pass in tags, an array of tags that can be used to control cache invalidation. So basically when we make a query, it will cache that query. But when we want to invalidate the cache and rerun that query, we can say invalidate the cache using a specific tag. So let's go back and create a new function. This is going to be get chats, I guess. Yeah, that's fine. This is going to be equals async. Now here I'm going to put in the function that we were calling before. But then the second parameter you can see here is the key parts. So this needs to be a globally unique value. And then we're also going to pass in tags in the options. So this unique value, get chats for chat list maybe is good. I actually don't know what naming is good. And then tags is going to be, I'm going to use the same thing. So now I can invalidate this query using the tag, and then I can get the chats by calling, oh wait, get chats. Okay, there we go. So now in my server action over here, after I have inserted a chat into the database, I am going to import revalidate tag from Next.js, perfect. And I can revalidate the get chats database call here. Revalidating here will cause the chat list to rerun this database call to select the chats when it's been invalidated. So let's try this again. Write a function in C++. And immediately you see that it adds the new chat to the bar over here, and we get that output over here. And then if I write another thing, convert this to C, we don't get a new chat because this exists for the current chat. But notice that this comment is here because it doesn't know that we already have messages in this chat. Although I'm just adding to this chat in the database, I keep adding new messages, GPT doesn't know about these previous messages. So to get this feature working, I have to go back into my route here. And when I come in, when I make that post request, I'm first making sure that a chat exists. Then I'm sending off that request to OpenAI, and then I'm storing new messages into the database. But now before sending anything off to OpenAI, we should query the database for all the messages. So database select star from messages where the messages equals the chat ID, and then we'll get all of those. So const all db messages equals await that, and this should be an array, yeah, of all of those. Awesome. And let's actually order this by created at in ascending order. And then if we actually only select the role, and the content should be all we need. So then we can pass it in here. We can just spread that. So now we have the initial system messages that we sent to GPT, then all the messages from the database, and then the message that has just come in the post request. And then we save the new messages at the end. So the next time we submit a message, we're sending all of them together to GPT. So now let's start this over from scratch. Let's say write a function in C++, then convert that to Python, convert that to JavaScript. Sick. So now it's actually able to keep track of all that context. And what I found for this specific application is you don't even need to load in all of the database messages. I found that if you keep track of the user messages, the ones that I'm sending up to GPT, and you just keep track of the very last thing that the assistant responded with, you still get the same results. So instead of having to load in a ton of information every single time, you really just need the little prompts from the user and then the last big response from GPT. But you can play around with this as much as you want and see what works best for your application. And because this is now all stored in a database using this unique unguessable URL, we can share that link with other people and they'll be able to see the exact same thing. And the next thing to add to this would be user authentication. So if I'm the currently logged in user that created this, I'd be able to add to this and generate more chats. But if I share this with someone that isn't logged in, I probably wouldn't show this bottom bar, I wouldn't show this sidebar. They would just be able to see the thing that I shared with them. So that is it for this video. But in my next video, I will implement user auth on this application and get all of those features working. So make sure you subscribe and don't miss that video. Did I get everything? That was like an hour just for the database? What the